Hello everyone, I'm Alfian and today we are going to solve the Hackerrank algorithm preparation challenge on the implementation section of the breaking the records challenge. And then for this one we are tasked to solve as a Maria that plays a college basketball and wants to go pro, and each season she maintains a record of her play and she tabulates the number of times she breaks her season record for most points at least and least points in a game. And for this one we are going to solve how many points did she broke during every game season, and then if she breaks the highest scores then she will count it the max value as one, and then if she breaks the lowest scores then she also going to count it the minimum value as one, and then if it's still the same as the previous game then the counter is not going to count either or max or the minimum value. And then for this for explanation, the diagram below depicts the number of times Maria broke her best and worst throughout the season. And then for the first game, she will define or calibrate both the highest and lowest score. And then for the next game, it's either the same score or the lowest or the highest score. And then if it's going to be lowest, the current score is going to be lowest on that current game, then the value of the minimum value will be counted by 1, and then the current worst record or worst score of the current game will be calibrated to the current score that she was in. And then for this one we are going to iterate an array of numbers, and then for the output it's also a number of an array of number. So we are not going to use console log, but instead we are returning for the first one, let me use the more short and concise one, but I think it's less readable than the second one that I will show you later, that is more verbose compared to the first one that I am going to write in from now. Okay, so for the first one, let me iterate the first and calibrate the first game, and then calibrate the highest and current lowest score with the min as the minimum and max, and then declare it as the lab variable of an array to make it more short and concise, and then using the first element of the scores, which is the element of 0, and then for the max value we also determine using the first iteration or the first element inside the scores array, and then we can use return right away, return, and then the scores with the function called the reduce. If you still remember the reduce function, and if you haven't remembered it again, then you can scroll through my previous videos about my explanation about the reduce function, and then using the current iteration and then explicitly return it. And then for the next one, for the next parameter, we are using the array because we are returning as the array of numbers. So for the return we can declare it as 0 and then 0 as the minimum and as the maximum counter, and then we can use check to see if the if the current iteration is higher than the max value that we declare above. If it is, then we are going to count the first element, not the first element but the second element, which is the 1, or this part, the 1 as plus 1 plus equals 1, which is the maximum value inside the array, returning array. And then else if the current array is lower than the minimum, the current minimum element, or the score from the previous game, then the counter of the minimum or the worst score will be counted by 1 using the same plus equal sign and then 1. And don't forget to recalibrate the current max value or the max variable using the current iteration. So the next time if we are going to get another score that is higher than the previous game, then the maximum value will also recalibrate to the current maximum value. And then we can also apply the same thing for the worst score or the minimum score. And don't forget to return the current accumulator, which is returning this array of numbers and then returning it to fulfill the requirement of the worst and best score counters. So let's run this code to see if it works. Looks like we declare it as the opposite array. Let us change this using the accumulator 0 and accumulator of the second element, or the 1. That means for the first part of the accumulator, it's going to return the highest score counter, and then for the second one we are going to return the lowest score counter. Let's run this again to see if it works. Okay, let's submit this to see if all test cases are correctly implemented. Okay, so for the second approach, we are going to use more verbose approach, which is declaring it one by one, just like the first approach, using the let minimum and then scores 0, just the same as the above, and maximum also just like the above one, score 0. And then we can use for loop, the traditional for loop, and declaring the first iteration as 1, because we are already calibrating, we're already using the first game or the game 0 to calibrate the first game. So that is why we are going to skip it right away to the second game, which is the game number 1, and then check if the current iteration is still below the scores length array. If it is, then we are going to count the I++ using the traditional array iteration method, and then we can declare the counter using the let minimum counter I forgot the O, and also let maximum counter. We are using let because it's going to be changeable throughout the iteration. So let's adding a check if the I, or not the I, or the scores array, scores I, or the current iteration is higher than the maximum. If it is, then we are going to add the max counter, and then define the maximum with the current iteration scores I using the, and then for the another else if clause check, if the scores of the current iteration is lower than the minimum value, then we are going to count the minimum counter plus plus, which is as the same as +1 plus equals 1, and then define the current minimum with the current scores. And then we can return the, after the iteration has been completed, we can return the minimum counter and the maximum counter as the array. So let's run this to see if it works. And this approach is more verbose to maintain its readability for beginner, or if you want to refactor, and it's better than my first approach from the first one. Let's swap this part and then run the code again to see if it works. Let's submit this. Okay, so that's about it. I hope you understand my explanation of the both approaches. If you have any question or if you have another solution, you can write it in the comment section. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.